Hello and welcome back to another video on Coast to Coast Hockey. Today we're going to be taking a look at what Team Sweden will look like at the 2025 Four Nations Faceoff tournament. I'm Cameron.
I'm Noel.
And I'm Nick. First, we'll break down the forward lines, then we'll look at the defense and the goaltenders, as well as a full roster projection.
Let's get into it. Starting off with the first forward line here, if you want to get into your line first here, Nick, pretty similar to the other two on the screen there as well, though.
Yeah, the symmetry sort of speaks for itself when we're looking at three of the top Swedish players in the NHL and three of the top NHL forwards, you could call it, as Elias Pettersson being a perennial 100-point maker, as well as Philip Forsberg having one of the best years of his career, and William Nylander continuing that upward trend despite aging every year, getting closer to 30.
Not only are these guys, you could argue, the top Swedish forwards in the NHL, this line also works really well together with Pettersson down the middle and Nylander and Forsberg on the wings. I think the just line construction makes sense.
Yeah, for me, it's no doubt going to be Nylander and Pettersson, and then it's just the reemergence of Philip Forsberg this year. Like Nick said, he's got 81 points in 72 games so far. 40 goals are part of that. So just a total bounce back year after a little bit of a down year by his standards last year. So great to see him really solidify this top line and make it probably one of the best in the entire tournament.
He also plays with a bit more grit, so he complements these two skill finesse players a lot more than some other players he could have had on this first line, like Bratt, for example.
And while the straight line speed is not necessarily there in guys like Forsberg and Pettersson, they're more about the shiftiness. I think that William Nylander will be the guy to catch people off guard with playmakers like Pettersson and Forsberg playing alongside.
The other thing too is just the intelligence with them both too. So regardless of the other winger's speed, I'm sure they'll be able to work it out. So, fantastic line if you haven't got that from what we've said yet. Moving on to the second line for Team Sweden. If you want to kick us off again here, Nick.
Yeah, absolutely. So a bit of symmetry with some of your players as well. I like Mika Zibanejad specifically in my top six. I think he plays well with better players. I think if you're going to have him on Team Sweden, I can't put him in the bottom six in a place where he's going to have to just sort of grind things out and play against worse matchups. So I like him in the top six. I like him alongside a guy like Elias Lindholm. Elias Lindholm has struggled recently with guys like Huberdeau and Calgary, leading to his eventual departure. So I'm curious to see if guys like Jesper Bratt and Mika Zibanejad, with a bit more scoring touch and a bit more sort of vision on the ice compared to a guy like Huberdeau, who seemed to slow down in recent years, maybe that will help Elias Lindholm sort of come from behind as the third forward and sort of see the play in front of him rather than having to be the guy leading the rush.
Yeah, on my line, I have Mika Zibanejad on the wing, but I feel like both him and Elias Lindholm are pretty interchangeable. They both are pretty flexible and can switch out if one of them's struggling on the draws, for example. And I put them with Adrian Kempe. He's kind of similar player to Bratt, as Nick mentioned, just kind of speedy and has a scoring touch. So look for this line to work well against other second line matchups.
Yeah, I kind of got parts of both of your lines here, a bit of a mix match of the two. I got Bratt, Zibanejad, and Kempe. You'll see why Lindholm isn't on this second line with my next line. Might make a bit more sense, but Kempe plays with a little bit of grit. He can score goals, got better every single year he's been in LA. So I think he makes sense in this top six. He's a good enough player. Zibanejad is a great skill player. And Bratt, again, 3 years in a row, he's put up over 70 points. So he has become one of the best Swedish players in the entire world and makes a ton of sense here with these two skilled guys. But also, like I said, I think Kempe brings a little bit of grit as well and is able to do some puck retrieval. So again, like the construction of this line here.
I have one more thing to say about
Mm-hmm.
Lindholm. Ever since that year he was on the line with Gaudreau and Kachuk, where that line absolutely popped off in Calgary, he seems to have gotten worse every year. He's traded to Vancouver and hasn't looked that good this year as well. So I think it's gonna take into effect like how he plays next year. And if he's still struggling, we could find him further down this lineup.
I think that's probably the perfect segue into the third line where I have Elias Lindholm. But if you want to kick us off again, Nick, with your third line here.
Yeah, absolutely. So one player that you see here that may not be on other third lines would be Leo Carlsson. I've been extremely impressed with his first year in Anaheim. I believe in a year and a half's time, when this tournament will take place in early 2025, Leo Carlsson will be one of the top Swedish players in the National Hockey League. I think his growth as a player in a system that is pretty brutal in Anaheim seems to, get a bit overlooked. Leo Carlsson is a very strong player. The size sort of speaks for itself, but also the way he plays. I really like his edges. I like the way he skates. I like the attack mentality that he has. So I think him on a third line with a guy like Raymond, who can sort of finish and bury the biscuit after, seems like a perfect fit, as well as the complementary piece of Joel Eriksson, which you see there on all three of our lines as the kind of the perfect third line center for a Team Sweden.
Yeah, I was gonna say Joel Eriksson could be an elite third line center on any team. And for his wingers, I put the speedster Jesper Bratt on this left wing, and then I have Lucas Raymond, who's kind of more slower, high IQ hockey player on the right wing. So I think those two players really complement each other. And then you have Joel Eriksson, the workhorse to retrieve pucks and play really well defensively down the middle.
Yeah, for me, this is where I have Lindholm. I haven't played in the left wing here. I just know he has that past history of playing that position. He's played it a bit with the Vancouver Canucks as well. And then we've said Joel Eriksson is the prototypical third line center, great defensively. And then I have William Karlsson there as well. What can you say about him? Stanley Cup winner, one of the best Stanley Cup speeches of all time. But for me, this line is one of my favorite I've ever been able to build because this is the best shutdown line I've ever seen in my entire life. With Lindholm, Eriksson, and Karlsson, it's three guys who are known for their defensive pedigree around the NHL. And I just think that you have all that skill in your top six. And then against the other team's top players, you throw out this line, and it's going to be just living hell for the opposing team. So in a tournament where you're playing against super highly skilled teams, I think I wouldn't say this is a pure defensive line. Each of these guys have the offensive upside in their own right, but this line has the ability to just turn it on and shut down the other team's best line when need be.
Yeah, I can rebut that point quickly because I went the opposite direction as you did. I do like the idea of having a shutdown line in these kind of tournaments, possibly if it becomes sort of like a tight checking game. But I just think it's going to be such an open tournament. The last time we had this opportunity to see national NHLers, it was pretty much in 2014 with the Team North America winning against Team Sweden. It was very open ice, just a lot of high skill, high speed, everything you kind of want to see in an exciting environment. So that's why I've built my lineup based on that. I have guys like Leo Carlsson and Lucas Raymond elevated in the lineup in places where they can succeed together. So I don't have a shutdown line here per se, but I do have some guys that are still reliable.
Yeah, as you'll see later on, I have Leo Carlsson on my team for sure. I just don't think that I might be as high on his progression to the point where he'll be able to crack the lineup per se at the start of the tournament here. He's definitely a great player that I think no matter what, they're going to bring along to this tournament because you want to get him kind of involved in the national program here. And I think I also like the fact you have him with Joel Eriksson because talk about a great role model for him, another big-bodied center who you'd love him to kind of copy his game after. So no issue with any of these lines. I just happen to I'm just a massive fan of this defensive line that I have here. It's one of my favorites I've ever been able to make. Moving on to the fourth lines here. Once again, lots of familiar names from the rest of the lineup. Why don't you kick us off once again here, Nick?
Yeah, so to the point of, shutdown centers and shutdown lines, Sweden seems to have a decent amount of these kind of prototypical guys. Michael Backlund seems to fit this role perfectly, and that's why I have him on my fourth line here. He makes all of our teams. It's possible that in another sort of universe, he doesn't make any Team Sweden teams because of his lack of offensive ability, but he does create a lot on the ice. He does have great on-ice metrics, playing with guys currently like Andrew Mangiapane and Blake Coleman in Calgary, so not superstars. Like, he has the opportunity to play with on a Team Sweden with guys like I have William Karlsson and Adrian Kempe here, both guys that have scored 40-plus goals in a season before. So maybe this will unlock a bit Michael Backlund, or he'll become that third forward like I felt Elias Lindholm might be as well for his line. So each line will have this guy that can sort of stay back, be that third forward, and cover the play in case these guys overcommit.
Yeah, Backlund also provides a lot of leadership. He's been around the league for a while and knows what it takes to win. We all have him on our fourth lines as the center. I wanted to include Leo Carlsson on the team. I'm very high on him as well. I'm not sure looking at how a fourth line role would be suited for his game, but I think he has all the tools to thrive anywhere in the lineup. And then William Karlsson, again, just an elite defensive presence, and he's a proven winner as well.
Yep. Yeah, for me, I'm a big time optimist, so I got Gabriel Landeskog on my right wing. I'm hoping that he's able to come back and play for the Colorado Avalanche this playoffs and then have a productive season next year. Let's knock on wood for that to happen. if it does, he's going to be on this team. There's no doubt. It's unfortunate that he'll probably be in a more diminished role than he would have been in years past. But to have him as your fourth line, again, Stanley Cup champion, captain of the team, incredible player to have on here. And he plays with a bit of an edge too. So literally the perfect fourth liner for this team, in my opinion. Mix that with Michael Backlund, who plays a responsible two-way game. Again, like Noel said, the leadership is off the sorry, should have been a captain for a couple seasons already, but finally got that honor this year. And then Lucas Raymond, for me, I just love the energy he plays with. He's not a prototypical fourth line player, but this guy plays with so much passion and energy that I think he'd excel in this fourth line role, and he'd take it and run with it, playing with two wily vets on the center and right wing.
Yeah, I'd love to see Landeskog on the team. I'm a bit more
Mm-hmm.
pessimistic than you. I mean, I'll believe it when I see it when he's back on the ice, but I'm hoping nothing but the best for Gabriel Landeskog.
Yeah, and to that point, similar to Noel, I did not have him on my team, even though he could be like a top six talent if he was fully
Mm-hmm.
healthy. I also don't want to bring people to the tournament that I have a fear that they're not going to play the full tournament. And Gabriel Landeskog seems to have that unfortunate history of not making it through full seasons. So I just want to bring a fully healthy team that can last the whole tournament, so I don't become short staffed, basically.
Yeah, all makes sense. So a great forward core overall. So moving on to the D pairs here. Nick and Noel, you guys have the same D pairs. So if you guys want to kick us off again here.
Yeah, contrary to the younger options in the lineups that we've seen in the forward choices, I chose the two steady defensemen, Victor Hedman and Eric, defensemen in the NHL, and two of the best Swedish defensemen maybe of all time. Victor Hedman and Erik Karlsson have been around for years, doing the same thing every year and being consistent. I really like Erik Karlsson's transition into Pittsburgh. He's kind of become sort of like a hate project. People have been just deciding that this is the reason why the Penguins are bad. This is not the truth. Erik Karlsson has been exceptional himself and exceptional for his teammates. His on-ice metrics have improved since San Jose. Playing with better players as well helps. But Erik Karlsson and Victor Hedman are two of the top defensemen in the NHL, and they are two of the top options for Sweden here.
Yeah, you'll see kind of a theme through my defensive pairs where I pair a really offensive guy with more of a stay-at-home shutdown defenseman. And I'm not calling Victor Hedman a stay-at-home shutdown defenseman by any means. His offensive games that we've seen this year is really not diminished at all since he won the Norris, right? Or a finalist at least. He's been a perennial Norris finalist. So I just like the construction of having the elite offensive option of Erik Karlsson and then Victor Hedman, who plays a very strong two-way game. And I think their games complement each other very well.
Yeah, for me, the only difference here is having Rasmus Dahlin there. And I, first of all, I just think Dahlin's a better player than Carlson at this point in his career. Personally, that's my opinion. Two-way, not necessarily offensively, but definitely two-way. I really like the idea of coupling him with a guy who's been there, done that. So you kind of put the green guy in Dahlin with the veteran in Hedman. So I know he's playing on his offside here, but I do like how it allows me to construct the rest of my decor, as you'll see. And on top of that, he's already playing the right side in Buffalo right now with Bowen Byram on that left side. So I didn't think it was too big of a stretch to bump him up to that first line, get him the most minutes, and really just ride this D pair as much as you possibly can.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons why I didn't have him on my top pair as well, is because I really think Victor Hedman is the number one guy on this team.
Mm-hmm.
So as we all did have him as our first left defenseman, I didn't want to put Rasmus Dahlin on his right side until I see more of him in Buffalo on the right side. I'm worried about lefties on the right side. Speaking of which, Miro Heiskanen was the big kind of catalyst for why I didn't put Dahlin on the right side, because I've seen the negatives of putting a guy on his right side, especially when you are on the blue lines in the margins. A guy making quick plays in succession, being able to be on your forehand most of the time helps. So in the moments where there's a bit of a tighter game with superstars all over the ice that can take the puck off you in seconds, I worry about Dahlin getting pickpocketed and sort of exposed on national TV.
It'll be interesting to see Buffalo's line combinations going into next year because they have three really elite, or maybe not elite, but young up and coming left D in Owen Power, Rasmus Dahlin, and Bowen Byram now after that trade. So if Dahlin moves over to the right side and starts excelling, I definitely would consider putting him above Erik Karlsson. Again, this is early on. We still have like or the playoffs to go and then half a season to see how things play out.
Yeah, no, it's a healthy debate here because I think both of these guys would be fantastic on that right side. And just gonna remind everyone, Dowling had 92 points last year. I was even surprised by that. He completely broke out last season. So just
Yeah, well,
incredible options to pick from here.
well, Carlson had 100, so I don't know what you're trying to say.
Yeah, what was his plus minus on that
Yeah,
team?
yeah.
Yeah. Oh well. Anyways, moving on to the second pair where don't worry, I have Eric Carlson there. I didn't relegate him to the third pair or anything here. I'm not insane. So if you want to start off with your second pair there, Nick.
Yeah. In recent years, I have really trusted the Boston Bruins' decision making because their results have spoken for themselves. I really like how every year, regardless of who is in their lineup, they seem to be a successful winning team. And one of those big acquisitions that I liked was Hampus Lindholm. Hampus Lindholm coming from a bit of a shallow market in Anaheim. I really was wondering if this is like his chance to be like in the spotlight and shown for who he is, which is a solid top four, offensive minded but defensively aware defenseman. Kind of just like an all around perfect guy for me in my top four. So this is why I have him with a guy like Dahlin, who's going to sort of stretch the ice and be a little more risky. So the high risk plus the low risk hopefully equals, a solid pair. But overall, if Dahlin, again, as we talked about before, with Dahlin playing on the right side, Lindholm could take the left side because they're both lefties on this pair as well. But I've seen Lindholm play on both.
Yeah, I really do like Lindholm. He's one season removed from a terrific offensive year last year. He's taken a bit of a step back this year, but is still putting up great numbers on a great Boston team. For me, I'm sticking to my theory of the defensive defenseman and then the offensive defenseman. I have Adam Larson to be my shutdown guy, and then Dahlin can be a more run and gun offensive weapon that we know he is with his 92 points. So Adam Larson may be a bit of an unconventional pick, but I'm really high on his game. I think he is a great fit on Seattle and would be a great fit on Team Sweden.
Absolute shot blocking machine, no
Mhm.
doubt. For me, one of the biggest reasons I didn't put Carlson with Hedman was because I didn't want Hedman to be playing the game thinking about compensating for mistakes that Carlson might make. I wanted him to be able to focus on his own game and kind of flourish with Dahlin. So that's kind of why I put a guy like Hampus Lindholm, who Nick, you said is defensively aware. I think this guy has the ability to cover up any defensive warts that Eric Carlson might have in his game, overstated or whatever you want to say about them. But at the end of the day, he's not the world's best defensive defenseman. That is well established. So putting a guy like Hampus Lindholm on his left side, I think you could argue a guy like Ekholm, who we're going to see later on, would make sense here too. But I just wanted a more defensive minded guy to kind of compensate for Carlson here. And that's the thinking behind Hampus Lindholm and Eric Carlson together as my second pair.
Yeah, and one key piece to Dahlin's play for me, which is why I have him on the second pair, is his penalty taking. If you look back to his numbers, he actually takes a lot of minor penalties, whether that be sick infractions or just weird plays where he's just caught in a bad spot and has to cover for himself. So I have him with Hampus Lindholm to hopefully mitigate this option, sort of like he's always gonna have somebody back, so he doesn't have to cover for himself as much if he wants to like go on the rush as the fourth forward, for example. But I do think Dahlin in a safer position is on the second pair again against better matchups, hopefully, rather than let Eric Carlson do this kind of work. Is what I'm trying to say.
And oftentimes, when looking at NHL teams and their decor, there's such a disparity between time on ice for their first pair and then their second pair, just because of that skill like level is just so different. But when you're looking at these international competitions, it really doesn't go down much between pairs. They're deep, so deep all through and through. So, and my point is their ice time, in my opinion, will be pretty equal as well. It's not like you're going to have that top pair logging so much heavy, like such a heavy workload. It's going to be fairly spread out between all three pairs.
I do agree with you for a lot of the teams we've looked at, but for me with Sweden, I think they have three elite defensemen really. So I think two of them are going to end up on that line that's going to get a bit more run. So for me, that's why I decided like I want Dahlin to be the guy that gets that run, but either any of those three make total sense there. But you're definitely right with the depth of these teams. I just think Sweden, maybe more than Canada or the US that we've looked at, might have a bit more of a clear cut top three defensemen here. And then the rest are all fantastic defensemen in their own right, but just aren't on that level, in my opinion.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah, each of these guys, like those big three, do play so much on their own teams. So having to take a step back and play like maybe like even 3 to 5 less minutes might actually affect their game negatively. We don't really know. So I'm excited to see how they deploy these guys.
Exactly. Yeah. They have Sweden just pumps out incredible defensemen. That's undebatable. Uh, Moving on to our third pairs here. It's all the same. And it makes sense because we have two guys from the Western Canadian teams that just seem to be a perfect match on a pair together. So if you kind of want to get into some of the rationale behind that first, Nick.
Sure. As Noel has mentioned throughout his whole philosophy on defense, offense plus defense should equal an all around great pair. And that's what we're going for here. All of us really like the idea of Matthias Ekholm. He was great in Nashville before Edmonton, and now he's gotten this like super media heavy spotlight, which has proven his value even further. He hasn't really changed his play all that much. He's playing with Evan Bouchard, who's really grown into this offensive dynamo. But at the same time, he was playing with some great offensive guys in Nashville and has been consistent for years. So that's a great third pair option alongside an offensively, you could call it a bit of a risky player like Rasmus Anderson, but someone who likes to skate with the puck and play with the puck more than without. So having Ekholm cover him, similar to what I had with Lindholm, I think the good combination works out well.
Yeah, you called Rasmus Anderson a risky player, but Matthias Ekholm plays with Evan Bouchard, who's maybe the definition of a risky player.
Yeah.
I've preached the same thing. I've been consistent the whole way through. Nick broke down my theory in this D core or this D pair. So
For me, I will say I think Rasmus Anderson is definitely offensive minded, but less risky than maybe guys like Dahlin or Carlson. So having him on this third pair where it can be a little bit more defensive focused makes a lot of sense. Plus, both of these guys, which I love, play with a little bit of snarl. Ekholm especially, and then we all know Anderson got suspended earlier in the year. So just a couple guys that can muck it up a little bit on your third pair, which I think has some value, even in a tournament like this, especially since it'll be played on NHL-sized ice.
And one thing I am curious about is special teams because Rasmus Anderson thrives by being able to be a power play one specialist, but it's clear on this team that he's farther down the depth chart than the PP1D core. So I'm curious to see if he's able to sort of play the game that he wants to play in third pair minutes. So it's a bit of a question mark, honestly.
All right. Well, moving on to the goaltenders. Again, lots of symmetry here, only one different. But if you want to get into your trio of goaltenders, why don't you kick us off, Nick?
Sure. We all have one of the best goaltenders in the National Hockey League as our starter, Linus Ullmark. He's really proven his worth in Boston. Similar idea that I mentioned before, where a player in a bit of a more shallow market with less of a media attention like Buffalo comes to a Boston superstar team and elevates that team into such a great, well-rounded team. And I believe he won the Vezina last year as well. So he is one of the top goaltenders recognized by the league and its GMs and everything. So the backup, Jacob Markstrom, a bit of an up and down sort of reputation in the past couple years, but this year has blossomed. So we're getting an informed version of him, hopefully, for this tournament. So between those two guys, you really can't go wrong. And then my third goalie, because it's an extra goaltender who won't even be on the bench for the game, I picked Jesper Wallstedt. I believe strongly in this Minnesota Wild prospect. I think, as you see here, Philip Gustafsson is the other option, another Minnesota Wild goaltender. But Jesper Wallstedt has put up exceptional numbers in the AHL on a decent Iowa Wild team, and I think he's the future of Swedish goaltending.
yeah, I really don't have much to say here about these guys. I think it was a pretty clear-cut choice, not much to debate about who are going to be the top two. And then, yeah, Nick broke down Gustafsson as well. So I really like this goalie tandem they have here in Allmark and Markstrom.
Yeah, I agreed. Not much else to say. Other than that, I'd probably mention Allmark in just about every video because he's my prototypical great player on a bad team. So I always bring him up. Love him as a goaltender. Jacob Markstrom had a Vezina caliber year in 2021, 2022, and then he really struggled last season. But he's really bounced back this year with a 909 save percentage on a pretty poor Calgary team, if we're being quite honest. So again, right in that Linus Allmark mold, good goaltender, bad team, undervalued. So I love Jacob Markstrom's game. And then Philip Gustafsson, honestly, it's similar thinking along the lines of your thinking, Nick, is the fact that I think Gustafsson's 24, 25 years old. So he's a guy who's shown the pedigree for one season at the NHL level. He's obviously struggled this year, but I do think he will bounce back and continue to be a great goaltender in the NHL for years to come. So again, makes sense to bring him into the system here and get him some experience, not any games or anything like that, but some experience with the Swedish national team. All right, so that is it for the line by line breakdown. We're now going to take kind of a holistic view at the lineups here. So as you can see, this slide also shows who we've pegged to be the captains of the team, as well as who we've all brought as our extra players. So for me, I brought Leo Carlson as my extra. We've already been through this a lot. I think it makes sense to bring this young player and get him ingratiated in the system. And then the other guy I brought was Jonas Brodin, who to me, again, is one of the honestly most underrated defensive defensemen in the NHL. And I think that he perfectly slides in there to fill in for Lindholm or Ekholm or any of these guys who could possibly get injured throughout the course of the tournament.
Yeah, looking at my extra, I brought in Gustav Nyquist, kind of a Swiss Army knife, is having a great year in Nashville this year, playing alongside of Philip Forsberg and Ryan O'Reilly. And defenseman, I have Gustav Forsling, one of the greatest waiver claims of all time. He just signed an 8-year extension, so he's also a great two-way defenseman that can fit in really anywhere in this decor. And as for my captain, I had to go with Victor Hedman. He's a great leader, one of the older players on this team, and will provide some great leadership to hopefully bring them to the finals and win.
Yeah, and on my end for extras on defense, I had Jonas Brodin as well as Cameron did. I believe that over time, his defensive game has seemed to just sort of become what it is, and his ceiling has just shattered. So I don't even know really what this kind of player is for a national team in a like a star tournament like this. But as an extra, I think it's a safe pick to reinforce the decor if needed. On forward, I picked a bit off the market. I went for Alex Holtz. Alex Holtz is a young player in New Jersey. I've liked him ever since he got drafted. This guy will have one of the best shots outside the draft before he was drafted, and I do think his toolkit is better than other replacements I was thinking of. I was thinking of Gustav Nyquist. I was thinking of William Eklund, but then I looked at my lineup and I had a lot of players that embodied the same traits as those guys. So I want a specific toolkit that I can bring along in case I need to swap lines out. So Alex Holtz as a shooter, I think can switch out for any guys that are struggling in the tournament, whether or not injuries occur as well. I think he can be the finisher to the playmakers that I see throughout the lineup that I made in Team Sweden.
Yeah, and then going through, Noel already went through his captains, but I have the same captain as him, Victor Hedman. My assistant captains are Backlund and Carlson. Just will say, if Landeskog is able to come to this tournament, he will definitely be in conversation for a letter. So he's a guy to throw in that conversation as well. But for me, it's just Backlund's the captain of his team, prototypical pro, fantastic leader. Hedman has won 2 Stanley Cups. How can you go wrong with him as your captain? And then Carlson, say whatever you want about his defensive game. I don't think anybody's ever disputed. He's a great guy, great teammate, great leader. Basically dragged the Ottawa Senators to the Eastern Conference Final by the sheer willpower. So again, fantastic leader. So he's one of my assistant captains as well.
Pettersson's arguably the best Swedish player in the NHL, so that's why I had him as an A. I mentioned Hedman, and then we've talked about Backlund being the captain of his team, so it makes sense for him to have the A as well.
Yeah, and further to the point on Pettersson, in these tournaments, captaincy and assistant captaincy isn't necessarily as important as such as like NHL playoffs. Like the role of a captain, speaking with refs, keeping the reputation of the team cool, so that any biases are out of the game. I think having a top forward as an assistant is really helpful in this case because they're active, they're in the game for most of the tough moments. So having Elias Pettersson as assistant was important to me. At least somebody in the top 6 rather than someone like Michael Backlund who might not be on the ice when a captain is needed.
All right. Well, that'll pretty much do it for the video. So hope you guys enjoyed it. We'll have Finland coming out to you guys later on, as well as potentially a bonus where we'll review the tournament, as well as some other teams that maybe could have been there. So keep your eye out for that. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And thank you guys so much for watching.